Code. There you go.
All right.
Yes.
So welcome everybody at the third session of the think tank meetings. We're going to be talking about nonlinear composition developments today. And since we're right now again with a group where not everybody knows each other, it's going to start off with a small round of introductions. Still waiting for one person to arrive, which is Gleb, who should be here like in 5 minutes. So by the time we're done this round, he should be here. So, Janik, you want to start?
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm studying a Master of Music now at the Music Technology Department of the HPE. And yeah, non-linear music, well, interesting. I'm not very into it, but yeah, why not?
Well, my name is Marika van der Ven. I work as a composer and sound designer. Exploring the intersection between acoustic sounds and field recordings and electronic sounds. And one thing it's not what I'm doing, but yeah, no, not at all. But I'm interested, and I was also interested in doing things concept. So that's why
I'm Julian. I'm also studying music technology at Campus. My first year master student. And
okay.
I'm Mark. I graduated last summer from the school that they're in as well.
I think everyone.
Yeah.
Like
We have one outsider.
And
you should get more out there.
last year I've been asked to do a lot of stuff which was non-linear, which had something to do with non-linear composition, because there were a lot of Max Patch, a lot of interactive sound design stuff, which also had a great deal of music kind of influences. So really looking forward to what this meeting might bring.
Right, I'm Thijs. Also studying sound design and sound arts. In my work, opening a lot of doors. So in my work, I focus, especially in my art installation work, I focus a lot on stuff that is using more like possibility spaces and using either genetic ways or maybe sometimes neural ways to navigate through these possibility spaces to create sounds. So yeah, I'm really interested in what non-linear ways of composing can bring, and yeah, it's basically. Also, I'll be moderating tonight, so I'll sort of try to keep this discussion in bounds. So if we defer too much to other subjects or other stuff like that, then I'll try to keep things in check. Nobody there?
He's here.
Just walks really slow.
He's in the bathroom, I have to say.
So, yeah.
I'm John, Master of Music student as well. I'm doing sound design, producing my own music, and I try to perform a bit. I'm getting more and more interested in procedural logic. So I think procedural logic, the application of real-time processed sounds in games, I guess you would say. And I think this nonlinear composition is quite related to that area. Yeah.
I'm Luc. I'm doing a master here at Stein and Sonology, which is focused on designing instruments. So I'm developing one right now. Specialties mainly concept development and hardware. Composition, I don't know anything about it. But that might be also interesting to get some outside views on that.
I'm Pinar. I did the BA, half of the BA at Hakao, and recently, just actually finished my master's there as well, in sound design, both. And non-linearity has been a focus for me for a long time, since BA actually. Back then it was more on a research context, specifically game audio research. So most of my colleagues were especially researching in non-linear composition techniques. I was more into the sound design part, which does procedural audio oftentimes in the game context at least. Doesn't necessarily have to be there, but that's sort of the most used. You see it coming or not? Yeah, games tend to be the main place where it's oftentimes contact. Aside from that, for myself, for my own work, for sound art, I've been interested in interactive audio, dynamic sound design, which I think can benefit from non-linear composition techniques, especially if we're talking about more musical sound design, so soundscapes or something that crossovers of music and sound. And that's basically it.
Cool.
Maybe should wait for that, or should just go on.
Well, Gleb is also first time here, so maybe good for him to introduce.
It's actually too bad I missed it. Well,
yeah.
next time.
Next time.
Yeah, we can't wait forever, right?
Yeah. You give an introduction for that, yes.
Yeah, so Gleb is also a student at the HKU, and his focus.
Older guys. No.
His focus is a lot on noise and creating a lot of live performances with coding his own software for performance, basically creating his own tools to perform and make music. Also composes, but he really should do this himself because I'm not the Gleb expert.
Okay, I'm gonna bang on the door, so you can tell there, seriously.
He's nervous, I think. Doing drugs.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You should.
We got photos here.
Oh,
Hello.
So we're just finishing up the introductions.
Careful.
This is like Jenga.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Come here, because you won't
Cannot
feel
take
the
these blocks out.
Well, we can only talk to Gleb's hand. So Gleb, can you
Talk to the hand.
can you tell who you are?
Hello, my name is Gleb. I was in Thijs' class before, I got held back a year. So, I'm studying sound design at the HKU, and I do music stuff. Is that okay?
It's a short version. What are your focus points?
Electroacoustic, sort of contemporary classical mixtures, I guess.
Composition or performance?
Well, my strong point is mostly composition, but also a lot of performance with the KO blocks and stuff, so with live electronics.
Alright. That should be suffice, I guess.
Any questions?
So we're talking today about nonlinear composition developments.
Oh, by the way, before that, he's the moderator, so
Yeah.
Yeah, I told
that's
him.
yeah.
He told me you were away. He told us when you were away.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff in here, I think. Because if you have composition, there is this one definition of composition, which I'm paraphrasing in the worst way probably, but it's basically the sequencing of events in time. So if you want to have a nonlinear composition, you basically have two options. You either can mess with the events, so you know at what time something happens, but you're not clear about the events, or you can mess. Wait a minute. You can either mess with the events or mess with the time. So you don't know when something's going to happen, but you do have an idea of what kind of events are there, or you know when something's going to happen, but you don't know what. Or, of course, you can blow it completely open and create a system, for instance, that, in which you cannot predict when what is going to happen. So I'm kind of wondering, because there are some sort of borders in this whole thing, like what is the limit that you can go, that you can still call it a composition, and at what point does it cross over into, for instance, instrument design, or
How do you jump to instrument design from?
well, if you basically create your own programs, for instance, for live performance, you also create a lot of possibilities in sound, which aren't set in time yet, because you have to perform it to get there in time.
But you said instrument and so
And that's
Okay,
basically
but that's
design.
a very-
That's
okay.
instrument design on a laptop.
Okay, but that's one way of making non-linear composition probably. So when you maybe instead of jumping directly to software design, you should maybe
Yeah, but I just saying there's lots of ways to view this, like also from a game audio perspective or from a more contemporary composition perspective. So yeah, it might be interesting to find like a good point of entry. So I think there are basically two people here that work mostly with or have experience working with game audio. So maybe we can start off with that and see where what kind of developments are there in game audio for nonlinear.
You're putting me in a very
or John.
Well, me too, actually, because the work, the field I was involved in actually that is related to game audio is just conventional sample-based sound design so far. So I don't really have.
Yeah, I can talk about the procedure later much more maybe, but the composition part is sort of different. I mean, when I think of composition, then you're really talking about. Well, it's really time-based, and I'm not really talking about the content non-linearity. I'm not even sure if that's the way to say it, like Tyson mentioned, like two ways. Either you don't know what content is going to come, or you don't know when it is going to come. So far, the way I thought approach non-linearity was only temporal, like there's no linear time. It wasn't about the content itself so much. I mean, I'm not even sure if you can call it non-linear if you don't know what is going to play. It's still sequential and linear. You know what I mean?
But if you don't know what's gonna appear at a certain time,
but you
then
never
the composition is still could be still completely different every time you play it.
But
So it has very non-linear.
You can call that space slot for improvisation. How do you not do it?
I mean, I'm not really sure if that's the word for it. I mean, but that's maybe just terminology. I don't know. For composition part, I'm not the expert because I didn't study composition for a long time. But from what I remember, like I wish Tyson was here because he would have just put it really clear for you guys. But if you ask me from the game audio perspective, the main issue in game audio is that music is very much music's function is very much about the emotional layer of it, like as in everything. So that's all. But in games, is so much more sort of very directly linked to what is happening. And oftentimes, when people talk about non-linear music in game audio, they take certain state parameters like what's happening, is your health is low, or whatever certain very basic parameters, and then they say, okay, so the music should make a transition from high energy state to low energy state, whatever. But at least that was the framework how researchers were following. But this is just the playing of the music. That was at the end of the day, so far as far as I know, very sample based. So they have a training model, whatever, for example, which means the sample is starting based on a certain state. You have a pool of sample options, and then state meaning game state. And
Yeah,
the
is
game
there
state,
anyone who does not know how this works? Have you had those lessons from Tom?
probably not.
Yeah, one introduction.
Let's just put it that way. There's this game, and the game world has supposed states. Just assume that you can get any kind of state, and you can define what kind of state. And states meaning just like just a parameter. Okay, just think of it like that, and that could be based on your health, for example. Just to give a simple example, if your health is low, that should suggest the danger state, for example. The state danger is rising. So the music should change accordingly. Let's assume that. That's what you need. It might not be. But then, according to that, what they have been using so far, or oftentimes is used, is that they start with a certain sample, pre-composed. That's the thing. Different right now, what we're actually talking about is not that part, but in this case it's just pre-composed sample, but there are multiple options, so it's different, but still the same emotional state that correlates to the game state. And the game state changes. For example, your health goes even lower, it's even more danger. There is a transition, oftentimes there are tricks to make it smooth, etc. This is daily. And another thing comes in from a more dangerous state. Again, the samples are pre-composed. Now what we're talking about is composition. So here it's still, I would say, standard composition in that sample block, which is a couple of seconds, 7 seconds, I don't know. I mean, it also depends on how fast you want the system to respond, I suppose. Is time coming, by the way?
Tom?
It's time. You would also be perfect with it.
I don't know.
Okay, but anyway, so this is one way of playing nonlinear music, how you can organize music on the fly when you don't know when that state is going to come. It's basically temporal, when. There is going to be a danger state, but when. So it's about time, non-linearity of it comes from there. And you're just playing it, and when you receive a state, then you're adjusting your music playback accordingly. But the composition part is still, like, as you do, you just sit behind your sequencer and
it's like shuffling a playlist.
sort of, but in good time. So it's a really
Yeah,
advanced
maybe it's
approach.
interesting to explain how that works. In one of the models Tom explained once, it was like a grid. So you have a grid of like an X and Y grid. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You don't, probably. And all these, every cell of the grid has a piece of music. And
We were talking about the max patch. Adaptive music player.
well, not. Well, this is just a technique as well. It doesn't have to be a max patch, and it's weighted according to what's it called again?
I don't know.
No, the probability, the
Markov chain?
Markov chain. Yes, thank you. It's weighted according to Markov chain. So you know, like I'm in cell A3, and I want to get to cell D4 because D4 is
That's
really
yeah.
D4 is.
This is a learning algorithm.
No, it's not. It's not a learning algorithm. It's just I know which transitions work, and I need to go from here to there. So then the probability.
The fastest way to go there is to use this and this transition.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's not one way thing. They also like in the research they also use shortest path algorithm as well.
Yeah.
It's just
Oh, that's a
different.
technique for transitioning from one sound to another.
Yeah.
But that again, that's just about playback.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not about how
Yeah.
you compose.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about non-linear composition, or if you let's make it clear, are we talking about non-linear music playing, like non-linear music?
I would say it's still composition actually.
I was about to say that.
That's your screensaver, right?
No, it's not. What's that? Oh, maybe you did that when you.
I don't know.
Well, your camera's still on, so
Just
you
change the
okay.
setting.
The camera's still on, so it's okay.
It's your screensaver and you don't even know it. Boy.
But we're not,
boy.
we're not really talking about only non-linear composition now. We're talking about adaptive composition.
No, we said non-linear.
But adaptive composition is, of course, a form of
Non-linearity.
Yeah,
I know.
Guys,
Yeah?
can you explain what the Stein and Richard were working on?
I can sort of explain what the idea was, which is sort of a addition to this idea. This method that Pinar explained, they refer to that as sort of like cell-based.
Yes,
So
but
you have these different-
all of them are sort of different, huh? Like they're okay. Horizontal train, vertical, whatever. There are many weird names which I don't think I want to get into detail right now because it's going to be all abstract unless you have a presentation to show examples of,
Yeah.
which types would have done. Damn it! But and cell-based is one of the techniques. Yes.
What Stein and Richard, who are unfortunately not here right now, have been working on a system that uses agents, so that there's not one state of the game, but there are different points in the game where it's being measured if there's danger or there's joy or whatever. And all of these different agents that are scattered all over the game together make decisions about musical choices. And it's a little bit more elaborate because they made it also in such a way that different layers of music could be adjusted at the same time. So it's not just one pre-composed cell, but more like layers of.
That's a combination of hybrid.
I think
It's
Yeah,
more
but
elaborate
it's
version
already
of-
getting more fluid there.
No, but it's okay. But this horizontal also playing is also something that's been used for a long time, I guess.
I think we should make one point clear, which is, don't you think that playback of certain cells, like the order of that, isn't it composition itself?
I would say it's performance.
I would say it's more on the
Like,
performance side as well.
We should think of the game
Okay,
as
so
a
what-
performative kind of.
What I actually understand from non-linear is that it's not fixed order until it's performed. So it's in the definition of the composition. I think it's
because the performance can only be linear in time.
Yeah.
Well, I think the point is that if you want to go beyond this cell-based structure, then you have to have a system which actually influences what's inside the cells, so to say, instead of just shuffling them around.
Yeah, but actually it's kind of, when you sum it up, it's probably something like you have a sort of a seemingly chaotic or timeless structure, which you can shuffle back and around, whatever, and the performance side of it just puts it into time for you.
So why would you want to get into the cells? You want different music to play each time. you play
Well,
the game.
why would you want such a system, while composing, that you're not thinking of its performance? I mean, you are thinking of its performance, but you're not really fitting into one type of performance, meaning one timeline, one type of time order. Okay, so you just have these cells so that you can structure the time on the fly. So you're not composing the time structure, you're
Yeah.
just composing the musical content of it, but somehow you're trying to what's the word, separate it from carved in stone timing while you're making it. You're just trying to make it as small as possible. With sample you have limit, obviously, you have to make certain sample lengths or whatever. But maybe with procedural approaches, it could be so much more timeless.
That reminds me of generative
Yeah,
composition.
basically,
that's right.
basically.
But
That's
I
what-
was
I
just
think
going to
we should-
say that
We
as
should
a,
move more there in the conversation because
Yeah.
we probably have more experience on that, and we can ask the people from who do the cell-based.
can I say
composition.
just this one last
Yeah,
thing?
sorry.
I'm thinking in terms of gameplay. As a game player, I'd expect the same kind of themes to come up each time I play the game, so I can feel familiar to that mood again. That was
But there
just
can be
what I-
variations on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, variations are cool.
Yeah, but is it like the same themes or the same atmospheres maybe?
Yeah.
And
Meta level of it.
yeah.
Yeah, we could talk
But,
about conditions.
But I think the question is why would we need when would we need nonlinear approach, or why would we need nonlinear approach, and where do you apply those things?
Okay, I want to take the macro level for a moment because game audio is obviously one thing.
Yeah.
But what are others?
But that's what I just asked,
Okay,
basically.
Yeah.
Why do we want it? When do we
John
want
Cage
it?
had this piano piece where he had sounds of
Chance music.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, like in the 70s it was really popular to write pages of music and then shuffle them.
Yeah, like
Each time the performer would choose the order. Or Mauricio Kagel, he did a piece for, I don't remember how many instruments, but you could play it with 1 until up to 20. So even one person could do the performance, or all 20 of them, or 10, depending.
So one of the purposes of nonlinear could be to give the performer a space for his or her own expression or something.
I think we're standing on a wrong term. It's like the term non-linear is like mixing up the whole conversation, because you can only go linear in a musical context.
Okay, it's the way you experience. We are linear creatures, but that's
the
given.
experience
That's
is linear
given.
in time, but the composition
Itself,
isn't.
not.
Yeah, but
I see what you mean.
yeah, it is a good point that for discussing this, it might be interesting to see what the definitions are of what we're talking about. Like non-linear, and like what aspects can be linear or non-linear in music. Is it only temporal, or is it also content-wise?
Of course.
Yeah.
When I think of linear, I think of a narrative. I think of a story. I think of a meaning. So maybe non-linear is the opposite of that.
No.
I think of a graph.
Well, at least what I think is interesting about nonlinear composition methods is the random aspect of it. Something that can come up which you do not think of when you're, for example, behind the computer and with logic and whatever. Like, this makes me think of I think it was John Zorn who did the system with the cards, and then every musician can hold up a card. I think one of the big values about these sorts of systems is that you can get really original music which you couldn't have composed yourself, basically. Well, of course, sort of, because
that system was done for improvisation, right? Like sort of.
yeah.
Sort of
Structured
structured
Yeah, but
improvisation.
What's it called again?
But
Cobra.
Cobra, yeah.
but it was
Then
not.
also
It was
you're
not.
also free in musical content.
Sorry.
In the Cobra, you can decide yourself what note or how you want to play. Not only the structure, but also the content.
So it is very much for the sake of improvisation.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, where's the border between improvisation and composition here? If you go into non-linear composition, it feels like
That's
there's
big time music history.
No, it feels like it's getting closer together.
Non-linear improvisation in a way, yeah.
No, non-linear composition and certain structured improvisation are like getting close.
Well, improvisation has much to do with other people, and non-linear composition nowadays is much done with computers.
Yeah, I think
It's just doing what you wanted to do. Just follow the rules you set up as a composer.
But you can use the computer to create more options instead of
That's
more
right.
people, more brains. You use a computer for new ideas.
Yeah, that's true.
But when we're talking about definition, it's true. It's about people with computer improvisation.
so. Are we saying like we are using improvisation in the context of human interaction, and we're talking about
Yeah.
non-linear composition in the context of software
Digital
use,
realm.
digital realm or whatever? Is that it?
Yeah.
What are you
Doesn't have to
saying?
be.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Really
But
doesn't
if
have to
you,
be.
No, I was just trying to reframe what he's saying. I don't know.
well, it depends on how you treat the people who are playing it, as if they are. Yeah, well, as if they're just performing it, or if you give them the space to improvise, as in making up the notes themselves.
Then would you say if you're talking about not sample based, but not pre-constructed structures, but just algorithms that sort of really generate, then would you call it more of an improvisation than a non-linear whatever?
Like a computer improvising.
Yeah, which is like quite a big topic in for a long time now. But so is that what
call it
you?
improvisation? It
No,
certainly has a
because
human
the
element.
computer doesn't have a mind of its own.
Yet.
We're trying.
Yeah. No, it's just following the rules you give it to them, and if it's using
That's
randomized,
interesting.
if it's using randomization, it's still randomization.
Oh, you're on. Okay.
It's still, it's still just putting out zeros and ones. It's random in a computer isn't really random. Everything is predefined.
But
But it doesn't really matter for us.
No, it doesn't
For us, it
really
doesn't
matter for
because
us.
it's
But-
about how we interpret it.
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
But
So
then I wouldn't call it improvisation.
no,
But
I
then
can
you
agree.
could.
But generative doesn't mean it's random. In fact, when it's just random, it's not interesting.
You could understand
Random is
the
not
Controlled
interesting.
randomness.
human
Yeah.
brain
Trying
as
to
well
do-
in a deterministic way, and you may say that an improvisation done by some human being is not random at all either.
That's right.
Is that a
That's right.
valid sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So, yeah. But we are trying to define the word now, no?
For ourselves, I feel like we are trying to define for this conversation. Because
Yeah.
if we are going to follow what other people have been using non-linear in the context of game audio, it's a complete sort of different approach.
And it's like
occasionally.
another month of studying also.
Well,
It's
yeah, in a way.
It's
But
good to have a few things clear that not everybody is talking from their own definitions of all the words, and then we can have the danger of running into a discussion where everybody's idea of what we're
that's
talking
why
about
I'm
is
saying we
different.
should have a full dictionary tool here for this
Yeah.
for today.
So in that case, the nonlinear aspect in composition is so the truly improvising musicians is not like that's definitely not nonlinear composition. But where is that border? Where
Yeah, why not?
Well, it
Yeah,
is.
why not?
It is, but it's another kind of non-linear composition.
Yeah.
Would you?
I would say, like in jazz, you have these what's it called standards. Like we're doing giant steps. Okay, so we have these chords we're following, and it's actually
The free
like,
jazz,
like the
things like that.
like the thing you were talking about with the cells. You have the cells, but the order is not defined. This is the opposite. The order is defined, but it has to be filled in.
Yeah.
So let's say it's.
Would you agree with me if I say improvisation is strictly something about performing?
I would say it can only be about performing. You cannot put it, if you put it on paper, then it's not.
Yeah. And
Yeah, but on the other hand, game audio is also just about performing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But
they're trying to put well, for example, for game audio thing. I mean, there are different layers to why they want to do this. And it's not just for the sake of say how to say, there are very practical reasons behind it. It's about memory and etc. etc. Like instead of putting shitloads of samples in a place and trying to make a randomized or more living composition that changes but still follows a certain theme, they are the premise is that since the computers are getting faster, better, whatever, we won't have to bother with shitloads of samples, but we're just going to code some algorithms and good synthesis engines is going to make what we want on the fly. That there are practical sides of it instead of just like artistic urges to break ground. There's very practical financial reasons behind those technological developments. But what you said in terms of that in the game audio, it's all about performance. Yes, in a way, but
it's about experience, basically.
Also, but performance in many levels. Performance in terms of musical performance, that it gives something really enjoyable, pleasurable, but also performance in terms of CPU performance. So performativity is a kind of a weird thing there.
But we can simply define performance as well, actually. Yeah, that's so easy. You need one performer to communicate one or more people to experience that attempt of communication. I think that's a clear and basic way to define performance.
You
like
can make music. You can make music for yourself.
Yeah. So you also are the receiver at that.
It's more like an activity, something sensual, rather than communicating a message.
Well.
Yeah, but that communication is a part of that activity. I think it has to be, no?
That opens something else, which has to do with communication, language, understanding, or experience.
The reason I'm trying to define this is to be able to distinguish improvisation from composition. So that's why.
Well, improvisation.
There's output.
Yeah, and then there's composition.
Yeah.
Not.
Can we just go in improvisation, so on the fly composition?
Yeah.
No, actually, I disagree with that.
Okay, I'm just saying.
I'm thinking of composition as a recipe for a performance.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. You can also compose the sound really a WAV file, so to speak. So
that's a recipe with digital info.
Actually, I kind of agree because in a way, what you just said sort of defined all non-linear composition. You are making a non-linear recipe for a non-linear performance by digital means. In our case, at least. Actually, I mean, it's not the only way. Maybe you can interpret different, but the way you said it sort of made it clear to me.
Yeah, that's
for me.
Say again.
Composition is a recipe for performance, he said. And then I was just like realizing we were thinking of non-linear composition, then you're making a non-linear recipe for non-linear replication of this blocks or whatever.
So if you would have some sort of random element in your composition, then would that count as non-linear?
Yes.
Yeah, it is, but is it interesting?
It depends if it's something changing over time.
But what would it take to make it interesting? Because creating something non-linear isn't a big feat. That's
no. But that's why we're calling it in composition, and I think composition's main power is structure. So you're still giving it some sort of structure while it's still non-linear. So it's kind of like finding the balance.
It's always about setting the boundaries.
I mean, random is not interesting because it doesn't have any boundaries in a way. The way we try to set the boundaries in our head with our interpretation, and that is, that's like pattern, patterns we are trying to
That's
make.
like what?
Pattern
Patterns,
seeking.
yeah.
Sort of, our brain is working that way. But in terms of, I think, not just the listening part, but also the making part, sort of gives pleasure when you're able to give a bit of structure, or sort of break the structure, or somehow deal with structure, whether do it or break it or whatever. But I don't know. I don't want to generalize, but I think for me it's always this back and forth thing between. Yeah, somehow it always deals with the structure, whatever it is. Maybe some people can say like I don't mind, but
It's like you said,
random is not interesting.
But there's a lot of ways you can. I mean, there's interesting ways of using randomness. For instance, there's lots of interesting stuff you can do with randomness.
Yeah,
for
within
instance,
certain boundaries.
Or within certain boundaries, or use it in a genetic way, like use it as variation and selecting upon that.
But even that gives over time structure.
Yeah, that's good.
Not necessarily, depending on what you're selecting on.
The word selection, I think, is crucial here.
Sorry?
The word selection, I think, is very crucial. It's like composition is about making choices for other people. It's like I wrote this piece for you, and I think it's a genius or it's beautiful, whatever, and people come into the concert hall to enjoy the genius of it.
Yeah.
When you go non-linear or working with emergence and agents and that kind of stuff, you sort of leave it open.
So
well, what you create is a possibility space. That's what I usually have in my mind with these kind of things. You create sort of you set some boundaries, like okay, the sounds that will happen in this time, of which you might not even know how long it's going to last. Has a lot of possibilities, but it cannot go higher than this, lower than this, wider than this.
Some sort of boundaries.
Some sort of boundaries, but within those boundaries, there could be extremely unpredictable processes happening that actually, create the piece as it plays.
Yeah.
That could be either completely unpredictable, or using randomness, or using intelligence forms of randomness, or whatever.
And it works especially well with people. I've been using that kind of method for improvising with other musicians, and it always opens up unexpected situations. So I call that a kind of environment design. It's like I design the conditions into which you can make material.
The environment emerges from those conditions.
And people just do it, and something like this, which most of the time is not nice to listen to. It's nicer to actually do it than to listen to it.
Yeah, that's because while you're doing it, you have your maybe subconscious, but whatever your boundaries embedded in you. While for the listener, it might not be able to tap into that.
But does it ever actually? I'm quite interested in that. It doesn't ever create a beautiful experience also for a listener.
Sometimes it does, but most of the time,
what are the conditions?
You're just immersed into that kind of doing it and thinking about it and listening to the others.
Well,
I don't know if you can put your finger on why the listener liked it.
Yeah, sometimes when I listen to, for example, Cobra, I get and there's a beautiful moment once every 30 minutes, for example. I get I still have the feeling in the back of my head that I'm being tricked. That it's it's not being thought about, so maybe it doesn't mean anything. So there is no meaning when you listen to a pre-composed piece. You're more certain of the meaning that the composer is trying to.
What is meaning that it's not allowed to like it?
Well, not that it's not allowed, but that it's kind of fake, because it just happened randomly. So it doesn't
It's not
feel
worth
genuine. Genuine.
It's not worth your money.
Yeah, definitely not. Cobra is definitely not worth any money.
No, that's a problem I came upon. It's like you do those.
Moderator, you have to
Sorry.
moderate. Okay.
Do I need to be moderated? I'm sorry.
He's been trying to get words.
Oh yeah.
Well, I was trying to say, you shouldn't forget the theatrical aspect in what you say, the environmental designing and a listener listening to it. He also, or she also sees the performance and experience the whole thing. And maybe that can be far more interesting than the sounding result.
Yeah, it's for me. It's like watching a media player randomization or a flock of birds going around.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
It's like
Swarm behavior is not
it doesn't have a story to tell, or nobody's dying,
That's
or
why
it's not about it's not about liberty and love or whatever. It's just forms, you know. It's just things happening.
Interestingly enough, when I go see a band which plays their songs exactly like they're on the CD,
Yeah, that is
it's also not interesting.
No, it's not. But then that's the thing. We want to get some sort of like
The sweet spot. Where's the sweet spot?
You want to have something personal.
Yeah,
Something
and something not boring.
the live part of it. I
Unexpected.
think the live part of it is that things can go wrong. Things are not just digitally really copy pasted. That's the whole. Like it makes it more organic, more what we consider real or whatever. All those little, phenomenal, weird qualities to it. I mean, I think with all this non-linear phenomena, I think that's maybe what we're trying to bring back to the whole digital medium as well. Maybe with all the generative stuff, that's what we are trying to bring back. Sort of put some meat on it, some
Sort of-
like flesh, some organic side to it.
Human aspect.
Yeah, humanizing, like all those some drum VSTIs I remember from years ago. They had a button like humanize. Basically, it made it a bit like more, which sounded like a mistake. Obviously, it wasn't good, but yeah.
When you put it all the way to the right, it
Yeah.
sounds like mistakes.
But the point is that the word, like the word of choice, humanize, is a weird thing when you think about it. It's
Yeah.
basically that. We are trying to turn
And
it into our own
errors.
image.
We were
But
talking about that today.
Maybe.
Yeah, we're trying to turn that delay into something more human.
Right.
So we couldn't.
We should rent a Japanese.
But I
That's
don't really
still
have the feeling that nonlinear composition is about getting computers to act more human. I think there's a big difference there.
I didn't say human. I said living. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that's-
okay, but still that I don't really have the feeling that that is the essence of non-linearity of composition.
I don't know if it's the atom, but I think there is a link there. I believe there's a link there.
Getting the organic quality is exactly why I use lots of tape and analog stuff, because it's less predictable. And sure, I will still touch it while it's playing.
It's not about computer. Sorry.
Thank you. I was wondering, are we going to talk about the composition aspect now, or about how to make a filter sound more live? Because it looks like the conversation is kind of going into, yeah, I'm using tape stuff because that sounds more real, but this is about composition, right?
Yeah.
So this is about how to structure the music so it seems more organic, but that's a pretty weird thing, because if you're composing, then what's the difference between organic or living composition and, well, the other one?
I think it's about creating the illusion
Yeah.
that someone is
Performing
making
for
clever
you.
choices,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
someone
Well-
is something is at stake.
Yeah,
you know?
a
Like
detail
something
that
is-
you cannot understand at first look. Or
Well, yeah, but then what's the contribution of non-linear composition methods over classical composition, for example? Because
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
if
what
you're
we will-
if you're a composer and you work offline, so to say, then isn't it your job to make these sort of interesting changes and make it the feeling of that something's at stake?
Yeah, well, it's a method for creativity. Yeah, I would say
Well, yeah, I
there
agree.
are these like you could also like I make one half of a composition, you make another half, and we don't know what we both make and put it together, and maybe by chance we make something interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's just
an opportunity.
Well, it's a way to make minutes. I mean, or hours. It's something to really easy to, and it's adaptable. For example,
Yeah,
so
but
really
that's really like sort of the algorithmic approach, right?
not necessarily.
To make like
I mean, if you build blocks of loops, for example, and you loop them, and other ones over it, but other lengths, then yeah, you can make really hours of
Or like
music.
the Brian Eno app that can
Yeah.
that it can play on and on the same state, emotional state, and you just touch it and it changes. It's like it's an automaton. Is that what you mean?
Well,
Like a machine that can make soundscapes over and over.
Yeah.
Well, personally, I think this should not be about a sort of easy way out, but a method to create more interesting music.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But no, I mean,
Totally
yeah,
different.
but I'm also thinking like of the function of the composition. Like in game audio, it's really clear that you cannot predict how a player is going to play a game. So that's a problem that needs to be solved. And a way to do that is to create composition that is nonlinear. So then there's a question like we need something that can adapt to how a player is playing, and then there's a reason to do this.
That's non-linear composition in context.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but,
but-
but everything you do is in context.
That's what I was gonna say. How can you take composition? Yeah, like I mean, what's
Yeah,
that when
that's-
you
that-
take it like
No, that's right. But I mean,
it's like embedded in it.
this is but I mean, this is composition for game, and we have composition for the sake of composition.
And
Yeah, but it's also then like, composition for the, what is composition for the sake of composition? What is composition for the sake of composition? It's then I write like for a concert, or you write to release it somewhere, or you write there's other functions.
There's always a context that realizes.
I mean, if you compose something and you just listen to it on your own laptop, then that's too small of a niche to
When
really.
a composition is only composed and not played yet, so it's only an abstract idea, still in the air. It's not. It doesn't have context yet. But at the moment it's played.
Yeah.
I play it on my computer. It's being played in the concert hall. That's when it gets a context.
And the reason to make the play performance part of it, say non-linear, could be because game needs it, or you're making it for an improvised dance piece, and it's really improvised, not even structured, and you need that, or you need it for interactive movies, which is like you somehow some level of non-linearity needed, or you just for the sake of it, for your own pleasure, you somehow enjoy playing it on your computer, but you need a playback system which plays it non-linearly. But it's for you, but okay, still it's
that's true. Well, it was more the words I used.
Actually, this could be an interesting idea. Just like in game audio. Another reason for creating nonlinear compositions could be like an updated version of Mosaic, maybe. Like a composition that acts depending on, say, your actions as the owner of this apartment or something. When you go into
you already get these things with like Genius on iTunes, which is basically the same as game audio.
I have no idea what Genius is.
It's basically like a music suggestion engine. Like, oh, you're playing this song, then it
like
creates.
we talked about this last time.
Yeah, let's not go there.
No, but still, it's another sort of context where.
No, go ahead. Or were you going?
Basically,
Okay, well, if I can suggest something, I think this talk shouldn't be as much about the context, because I think you can think of millions of contexts for a non-linear approach, and how you will use it will be different every time. So, shouldn't we be discussing the designing of the environment more?
What do you mean?
Well, for example, to how do you say that?
Methods.
Yeah, to think of the rules in which a system can act, and
Mapping.
for example, yeah.
To think of methods, you need to have clear
Context.
purposes.
Well, yeah, that's also true.
Yeah, how can you extract?
yeah, exactly. But there's some back and forth here.
Yeah, of course. you
yeah,
cannot-
that's my point.
You need to know why you do something before you can create the boundaries. But but also like the boundaries are really important in order to get something interesting going.
And we already talked about that. I mean, you have different levels of really composing the notes as in generative music, or you make building blocks as in cells playing.
In example samples, whatever.
Yeah, samples could be loops. Well, yeah, but there's probably a bit longer. There's more sequences. And you can have more on top of each other, which, which doesn't run parallel.
Multi-layer.
Exactly. And well, what do you have else?
And things like RJ DJ, is that also a way of non-linear computation? It's an app for the iPhone, and there are tracks with no audio, only effects in time.
Now, basically, it just runs PD patches.
Yeah.
And well, recently they've put it under. They've made categories, which is really shit. So they made categories for interactive songs. So Air made a song in the studio, and they'll put it on RJ DJ with the tracks and just different effects which are controlled by your voice or by the movement of your phone, which is really shit. But there are also people who do really interesting stuff, like make a generative song, which is really, you know, even the synthesis and the filters are controlled by or your movements or the weather or whatever, which is loads more interesting.
Or they take audio input from the microphone and
they vocoder your voice or record it and play it back 10 minutes later, so you're like, what the fuck, it's just there.
I think this is a great example.
But I've had it on my phone for 2 or 3 years, and there was this 1 week where I used to download all these
The same.
listen to it all the time.
Years ago, and then that was it.
it has. Yeah, why not?
Why not? Why not? Is it that we need to get adjusted to that, or why?
Yeah, or do you miss?
It's also kind of freaky. Like, I mean, maybe.
Well, I find myself in these weird social situations where we're sitting on the bus going, exactly. And people are looking at me like, what the fuck is he doing?
What was it?
But I really like that. But I never did it again because people started.
But that's kind of weird, because like it is maybe sort of crossing the line towards the very lame instruments part. Like it's more opening an interaction channel between the composer, which is who God knows where, the programmer in this case at the same time, but the listener. So it's becoming
Some of them are. Some of the apps are. Others are really generative.
Okay, but the one that you said was like that, and there is also this part, like opening an interaction channel, which turns it into more of an instrument than a non-linear set composition in terms of content-wise. Sort of, not content-wise. I don't mean only instrumentized note-to-note content, but it also could be algorithms as content. So you can think of all those cell blocks not only like loops, actually composed or bounced loops, but you can think of them as parameter cells.
Well, parameter cells still reminds me of a sort of loop which has CC values in it, for example.
No, like parameter cells, like it could be a parameter that's feeding into an algorithm, or it could be
Yeah.
an algorithm feeding into an algorithm.
Yeah.
You know, it's more abstract. Then you sequence them over time.
Yeah.
Instead of the bounce output.
Yeah.
But so basically, you make it more fluid.
Yeah, and more chaotic over time, and more probably emergent. Or I'm not really sure. I mean, where's the line when it becomes just
But
just random?
aren't these kind of things only interesting when there's sort of like emergent behavior in there? That I mean, as a listener, most people want to have music that, I mean, yeah, to have something really memorable in there, or something like really intricate, or there has to be something musically in there that's, yeah, I mean, the kind of stuff that you would compose. Like the reason why there are compositions that people still like love today, because, you know.
I think you can still do that by making a sound that really evokes a feeling, for example.
Yeah.
You can have like different layers which are generated and have their own parameters that are which are variable, and that sound, the bass sound, could still be really
Yeah,
epic.
yeah, definitely. I also really have the feeling that could happen and work.
Yeah.
But for some reason, with most of the stuff I've seen and heard so far, it doesn't seem to happen. For instance, like with RJ DJ things, like, have you been listening there and really thinking, wow, I wish I had written this or something?
No, but there are things which are iconic for one context. Also with the RGDJ thing, they are iconic for that sketch that someone has made. They stay within certain bounds which are recognizable.
There are also examples from like Western music, like classical music, which are more or less abstract, like minimalist music from the 70s in America, Steve Reich, John Cage, or for the Dutch people. Simeon ten Holt. Like Francois Stinati thing. I wish I had written that piece. It's like I found the score 2 days ago, and it's really non-linear. It has arrows that point you back and forward, and you can go back and repeat that for 10 times, and you can go.
Really? I've never seen the score.
No, it's madness. It's like you can repeat things many times, and you go there for 2 times, and you can go back for 10 times, and you can skip that, and you can go back, and it goes like that.
Really?
And yeah, it's great.
Cool.
So yeah, it's not only about apps and tools, agents, doing emergent stuff. It's also playing piano at home, you know? Playing with someone.
But I think this is a good example about how a well-designed environment can create really good music.
Yeah, he designed the environment or the device with which people could. That's the difference. They don't reproduce the piece. They re-perform in it somehow.
But is the piece good every time?
Yeah.
Really?
Well,
every time it's played.
Well, he was composing it for 3 years, I think.
Okay, yeah.
But it's really
it's
Yeah,
wow,
I think
takes ages.
once they were playing it for 12 hours, I think. Or something.
But isn't that the difference between this composition and the non-linear compositions and the non-linear music made by software? Because this composer makes a lot of choices to create perfect environment, and when you play this piece you can...
Of course you're
it's
limited.
a personal choice, how many times will I play this piece and then I go back.
So what's
These
the
are also
difference?
rules
The
you can
fact
set
that
in software.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, I was about to say. I've seen
is
Yorick
there-
programming that patch the other day. And he was fine-tuning all the parameters
Yeah.
and how he's gonna repeat that and pitches and whatever. It's like fine-tuning your software. You might
Yeah,
be
That's
watching
exactly
that.
the reason
Might
why
be
some
watching.
of the I don't know what's the name of this app.
Yeah,
Is it DJ?
Yeah, some things work and
Yeah.
some things
Yeah.
don't.
There's,
Yeah.
there's not that much of craftsmanship in it. I'm not saying anything to the RJDJ, but I mean, then you come to the. Honestly, I really don't think there's as much craftsmanship as in that piece in RJDJ.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
could be
Not
like
yet.
if somebody
It could be.
if somebody spends 3 years programming
It
a
could be.
really
I
good-
didn't say it cannot be in software. I said in that one that she was given a specific example.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
said why it didn't work with RJD. That's why it didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, you're just talking about the content that RGDJ
Yeah.
offers.
Yeah.
Someone
I
could
also-
make
also
very
I
good.
could. I didn't say it cannot. I
Okay.
said the specific thing didn't work because of that. Because of lacking craftsmanship.
Yeah.
In that case, it doesn't have to be always that.
No,
By chance,
there are also
one-
a lot of shit written pieces.
Yeah.
Pieces which are written down and are shit. So
Yeah, yeah.
I guess Siemens and Holt probably made some as well.
It's maybe because programming is also like a craft in
Yeah,
itself.
it-
And then you're like, I made a patch, wow, it's complex. And a lot of people are like, okay, that's it, I'm proud. But that's
But
where
see,
the
every-
composition actually only begins.
Yeah.
And then
Also,
And then
that's
there is a thing that when a written piece like that is performed, there's interpretation of each performer, and that brings a whole new layer.
Yeah,
usually.
exactly.
So I think that is sort of a difference between completely algorithmic and synthesized music compared to performed music by humans.
I agree. Then that brings it naively and really, yeah, you might call it I don't know what the word lame, let's say. But I think that's the difference when I said making it more living. That's the part where people have, like humans, we still have, like we can live perform, which means we can put our own interpretation even on a fixed medium, even the most fixed medium. In the most strictly written composition, bring it to a certain level of subtle human interpretation gets out during the performance, which is not really happening in a way that we appreciate, we see as creative from computers so far. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do really think that it should be possible to
It
write
should be.
neural networks that start to not just execute
No,
algorithms,
but actually
but interpret.
Yeah, but that's a whole another level of excitement. I would say.
Yeah, but I think if there's ever going to be anything really interesting in computer-generated non-linear music, it should be in that sort of
Yeah.
vein.
Interesting point here is I think interpretation can be thought of as a byproduct of ours.
It's being human.
Yeah, because when we want to perform something that is written down, say, we actually intend to reproduce it exactly how it tells us to reproduce it. And each time it differs because we just cannot do it exactly the same.
Yeah,
Because
we don't know how to be perfect.
It's like we don't
and
have
because
control
notation
No,
is so
which is a
limited.
good thing. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But it's also that notation is so limited.
Sorry?
Notation is
Yeah, that's-
leaving extremely big room for your own interpretation.
Yeah, that's right.
Even the strictest.
Yeah, that's what I.
But that's also
tried
a
to
difference maybe
explain
with
most
computer-generated stuff because you cannot write a computer program that says, do something like that.
Yeah.
You have to specify like in quite detail what it does. Otherwise, you just get parse errors and shit like that.
But don't you think that first of all, even if you have a perfect notation, we wouldn't be able to play it perfectly. But,
human.
yeah. But for the computer,
It's the opposite.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then you get to the limits of execution and,
Well, yeah,
and
okay.
not to the interpretation of what's
My
there.
other point was, for example, you have forte, mezzo forte, whatever. You can give that choice to the computer as well. Choose a number in this range, you know.
Yeah, but
And then you have to specify the range.
but what you would have to
yeah.
write then is you have to
That's how
specify the
it
range that one, but you have to write an intelligence that analyzes what has been right before, and from that information makes a decision on what that mezzo forte at that specific moment should be, and not having a random range between it.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a mezzo forte in rhythm music, the performer is not gonna play randomly pressure on a string.
No, but a player won't start the composition itself, the performance, with a blank sheet as his memory. That will
I've actually
affect-
played around with that idea.
But yeah, what do you mean?
Well, that will affect those decisions as well. Not just
Having
from
played it
the
before.
beginning of the composition, but also the
beginning of his life.
performer. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Brings his whole experience of his whole life
Yeah, of
with
course.
him to make the decision.
Yeah.
And a computer.
So that's why.
if you just
That's why neural networks
Yeah.
and that's kind of memories.
I don't know how that shit works. Can you explain?
No.
Because I'm a really
I mean-
lazy programmer, so I mostly use, okay, here's your range, choose a random number, go.
Yeah, I don't really want to go into explain neural networks because that's just way too big.
No,
but what's basically doing, okay, like very short version, you're simulating what a human brain is actually doing. Like
That's
And it's
sort
really slow.
the sort of
Really slow.
Now, it's really
Yeah, of course.
maybe in 20 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
We'll still be alive, we'll be
in
fucking
future
awesome.
gazing, you already see this sort of in computing, seeing more and more cores and having more like sort of cloud computing kind of way of working. And I think cloud computing and neural networks could be really compatible. And then suddenly the CPU and calculation speed isn't interesting anymore because you do everything networked. And that is something that could actually be a reality within a few years.
Safety at
Quantum
home.
chips, dude.
What? Safety at home.
Yeah, sort of SETI things, but for compositions.
So I kind of made.
Yeah,
It's an interesting thing, but I was feeling like we've been talking about like creating content, like say again loops, cells, or generative algorithms or whatever to create the content, and we sort of not necessarily really intentionally, but as we went along, it seems to me that we sort of separated the playback or the performance of these contents from the making of the content. So we were talking about different contexts where this has to be performed for games, for performance art, for films, or for your own pleasure or whatever. But the content was sort of scattered, whether in algorithm form, whether in sample form, or notation form, or written form with arrows or whatever. But when we were talking about all these things, we were putting human versus software performance. Human performance in terms of improvisation or reading and making your own interpretation of an even more strict score, or live electronic performance, even in a way, can be put into that, sort of making it more, live, human, whatever. And then the other side, we were talking about that how uninteresting oftentimes it was when it was performed by the computer. So that because it was like an interpretation level, and then you came to the neural networks, etc., which in the future gazing form could be very interesting because maybe it will be finally able to add an interpretation layer, which is right now lacking. It seems to me that so far all the nonlinear composition techniques, which again I wish Thijs or Stein was here so that they could wrap it up.
Tan, you mean?
Tan, sorry. Tan or
Saying
Stein.
Tyson, I keep getting confused.
Tan, okay.
You get confused.
Tan is, but like all of them are using for the performance part very stupid algorithms. Like Markov chains are very simple stuff, or the shortest path. What is it? what does it have anything to do with memory, the way we perform, the way we bring our past to the present and then to the future of the performance. Like, so the computer is lacking that thingy. If we can put an extra layer to it, that is a smarter algorithm, smarter way of performing, then it's something more, I would say, more on the development side that we can actually discuss. We can actually maybe even take it to there. Because the making of, we can write algorithms, we can make samples, we can make loops, we can write nodes, we can do all the content part, we can scatter it all around. But what we can right now, maybe even my suggestion, I don't know who's interested, but as a small task, we can investigate if we can put a smarter algorithm to make it interpretable. You know what I mean? That computer can interpret it. It doesn't just plays or executes our rule-based playback system, but it generates its own playback system, performance, whatever. It's a big thing, but I think that is something that I've never heard being discussed, even at Hakao actually.
Yeah,
We are talking about the content creation and the way they are played or their over time sequence, but so far only in the context of games, so it's very specific, very complicated.
But that's like one of those things that Steiner and Richards were
know,
making progress on. It's like using an agent-based system to make more interesting choices.
What does that mean, an agent-based system?
Yeah, I'm not gonna explain that because no, but I heard them explain it to me like in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but
a few months ago.
if you're not gonna give any details, then don't bring it up because it's just gonna bring confusion.
No, but what I want to say with it is that it's already
I'm sure, but it's not being discussed in terms of interpretation.
But wait, are you talking about a system just with a feedback loop, so it's generating stuff and then analyzing it? Because you were talking about analysis, right? That's what you just said. Interpret its own material or interpret something else.
It could be anything. It could be you can separate the synthesis or generation or content part separate from the performance part.
Yeah.
So the content could be something like, as a performer, you get a notation, a score, and that's your content, but you interpret it in your own way.
Yeah.
So you're separate than the score. Or you can improvise. Your content comes from you, but you're reinterpreting it as it comes. Maybe start playing. You catch one riff. But the moment you get it, you hold it, like the Cobra, and then you start interpreting it.
Interpreting it in different ways.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a system doing this.
You doing this, but not in this case, yes, the software. So obviously
this has been done in the 80s, right? Analyzing Geert van Wolferen made something like this. It's AMI, I think, AMI or EMI, something like that. It's called, I have to look it up, but it's also a system which analyzes just performances by Beethoven, for example, and then can spit out the Beethoven.
That's not what we're talking about.
Then I don't understand you correctly.
Oh,
I think this is
the experience of a person.
We're not talking about stylistic
analysis,
mimic or gimmicky words. That's not what I'm talking about.
What do you mean by interpretation then?
What do you do as a performer when you read a score and perform it? Even it is mostly.
Okay, so it's about performing a set of rules, still with the personality.
Yeah.
Okay, personality is a good thing actually.
Well, I mean, pick your word, but the point is that it's never going to be the same. So, but it's not just as simple as it's not going to be the same. You can always then, why not randomize it? Because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So how do you do it?
Yeah.
How can you bring, like we talked about, sorry, but I have to finish this. About memory, what you just played, how you just played, sort of having a reflection and also being able to get it and then put it into the next, like sort of be able to plan at the same time. But that's the whole smarter algorithms part, not just the shortest path. Oh, this loop should get from because we need fast transitions.
It's not about this moment, it's about the whole thing.
Yeah, having an overview, even when you're not there yet.
Anticipating the whole thing.
Which is a big thing, but that's why Price was promising with all these neural networks, etc. in the future. I mean, that I don't think it's going to be just neural network. We'll need something else as well.
It's as if you have a dedicated orchestra while you're playing the game with like a
What for instance, Gleb?
Yeah. What I think you're talking about are probabilities, normal distributions. At which, if you you know what a normal distribution is? Well, you have, for example, if the age range of a human is from 0 to 100, then most people will be 50, for example, and then fewer and fewer will be closer to 0 and closer to 100. If you can control these center points in certain ways, for example, if you're a software piano, you've been told to play a C, then the next note is...
You're a software piano.
No, but suppose you're told to play a C, and then you have a sort of probability system which says that the chance that the next note will be a C is 50%, a C's will be, I don't know, 49, a D will be, etc.
But this is Markov chain, right?
No,
not really.
Far from.
This is something that has the largest probability of doing or choosing certain actions. For example, to stay steady on the beat or just beside it. And then the more deviant your action becomes from what is intended by the imaginary score in this case, the lower the probability will be that it will be that outcome.
Is it really that simple?
That's
No, of course
what
not.
I was going to ask.
It's not a learning algorithm. It's just static, right?
Excuse me?
Statistics.
Yeah.
No, static.
What?
Static. I mean,
Static.
I mean,
sort of.
It doesn't evolve.
it just if you just say okay.
It doesn't adjust itself.
No, exactly. It's just the same. I mean, it's just whatever values you put into it, and
Well, that's
Yeah,
how
but-
a conservatory student works.
Yeah.
You put some values in it, and it performs it.
But I put that down. What was it?
you know this is
That's not how conservative.
That's why it's called conservative.
Yeah, it's a
No,
preservative.
but no,
Conservative.
what my point was is that if you want to achieve this sort of human-like interpretation or ability to somewhat improvise, then it might be a good starting point to start with these probabilities, see where it gets you.
What I more think
It's like
you need is to have some foresight.
Sorry?
You need to have some foresight or some system that can make predictions about what's going to happen in a sort of close nearby future within a composition. Because I really think that performers of rhythm pieces, they don't look like, okay, I'm now at X moment in the composition, what note is here? Oh, it's this one. Cool, let's play it. Let's check out what the next note is. They look at, okay, this is where I'm going musically, and I'm gonna work my way from where I'm right now to where.
But then you're back at the clip thing with the cells.
Yeah, but no,
It can also
because
be on high level.
because what you want is to have something that knows what has been
Exactly.
and knows where it's
Exactly.
gonna go,
But
and create both between those two.
Yeah.
but if you map
But that is really kind of like that grid thing, no?
Yeah, that's
No, because the grid thing is very much like, okay, your health is now this, and your blah now this, and what's the shortest route to the place where
okay.
you
But
sleep?
in that, then it isn't shortest route, but it's just anticipating on what has been. But it's kind of the same grid-like system.
So it's
It's
about
just that
having more resolution within that system also.
Or it's like a 3D grid.
The grid system, as far as I remember, I don't know which one you're talking about, and I certainly don't know what.
It's a long time ago. It's like 4 years ago for me as well. So.
Okay, Stein, I don't know how. So I'm not talking about Stein, which Dutch word. I really don't know what they're doing, but the grid system basically it was just like those cells don't mean anything. They're just like arbitrary data in a way, unless you put an algorithm on top of them and say like you have to manually actually put like okay this is this cell, name them with underscores whatever, and then each of them is has a probability possible, not probability even actually. Like multiple cells that it can go to. Mm-hmm. And they chose, as far as I remember, they did the shortest path or something and maybe changed, I don't remember, it's been a long time. But the point is, that shortest path is what kind of utilitarian approach is it? Why are you executing that algorithm to go from one cell to another? Yeah. It doesn't have anything to do with what it has been playing. Oh, and then I have to do this. True. Or I'm going to go somewhere else because it doesn't know actually.
But are there systems which do that, which keep in mind everything that has been and analyze it? Are there? Does anyone know of
I don't know. Maybe Stein's doing if it's all really.
But in this case, it's for a game, and the gameplay can suddenly change, and you need to go fast from one
basically that's
to
the
other.
utilitarian approach to it.
Yeah. In this context, that's necessary.
But right for now, it's getting close to 10 o'clock, so I was suggesting to do maybe a short break. Then we'll still have like 45 minutes to,
I think you really got something with the neural networks, actually, because if you're talking about the seeing what's been in the past, seeing what's in the future, and I think if you think of these systems in a composition and performance way, then, for example, if you have really, really good musicians from the conservatory study 5,000 years, I don't know, and the pieces they play are never the same, but they also fall on this probability thing, like if it becomes sort of standard and probable but not necessary, that for example if you've just had a really loud part, then the next one, if it's not louder but softer, then it will be this much softer. So if you link these kinds of events or parameters maybe together with a neural network and link them to these probability calculators or whatever, I think you can get a pretty living system.
Yeah, it definitely has to be a hybrid still, the thing probably anyway. I mean, you can just
cannot just map.
You can't.
It should analyze real music as in music that's been played, or even by humans, and music that it's made, the computer made by itself.
Only if it wants to mimic or imitate that.
Yeah, so I don't think that's necessary. I think the way you map these parameters, or well, the function of the analyzing of other pieces to see how they're composed, you can let the software analyze them, but you can also make those aesthetic decisions yourself. So that's where the aesthetic comes in of writing such a piece.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily has to be that the computer starts behaving like a conservatory student, but it's far more interesting that the computer starts to do something interesting.
Or let's say, I think it's interesting when it does something and we
becomes an interesting thing.
Well, that's the thing. You are the judge still. Like that's what, like, it's going to start doing something, and you're consistently, some sort of consistently, you're going to judge it as, oh, this is creative, this is good, this is interesting, which is.
But that's enough human input there already.
Really?
Well, the evaluating if it's interesting.
Yeah, but that's like a huge step, I would say.
Yeah, you need a curatorial system.
Ooh.
Shall I suggest something since we're gonna have a break? Like maybe once we come, the last question you asked, like, do we know anything that sort of follows past or looks into the future? What's gonna do?
Yeah, and
maybe we can take from
I'd
there.
really like you to explain neural networks.
Yeah,
a friend of mine told me a bit about it. And it was really weird. So, and he basically said Yeah, well, no one really knows, but it just works. Because it starts with a a field of resonance.
Let's pass this part of this work.
By the way, is there any input from the web?
I don't do input